So yeah, I'll begin. As most of you know, I start with a joke. So if anybody leaves after this joke, that's okay. All right, the jokes are that bad. So last week I won a prize last week, and the options were either €250 or 2 tickets to Elvis impersonator concert. So I rang up the prize line, and the operator goes, either 1 for the money, 2 for the show. Okay, nobody leaving yet. All right.
We're getting better.
They couldn't have got much worse. All right, so I think most of you have been here for either the first talk or been to the last talk. Been to one talk before previously. For other people that haven't been here, my name's Martin, and I've got a background in mental health and addiction. I've worked in the mental health and addiction for the last 10 years. Got a master's in psychology, diploma in cognitive behavioral skills and studies. And I just want to talk about the theories of modern psychology and where it's going right and where it's going wrong. So that's the sort of purpose of these 4 talks. And this is the third in the series. So this one is it's called Thinking Clearly and Being Yourself. So that's basically, it's about cognitive psychology and personality psychology. So I'll give a brief overview of last week. I talked a bit about social and developmental psychology, and talked about areas it gets right. Just very basic, we talk about very basic, just common sense stuff like that. A lot of these theories, they do get certain things right when it comes to just basics, but then they veer off in all sorts of crazy directions. But some of the stuff they get right is the early childhood and social environment affects our psychological health. It's pretty basic, we kind of know that ourselves. And the hypothesis is if you change the social circumstances or you develop secure attachments with your primary caregiver, that's usually in the majority of cases your mother, you can improve psychological health. Again, it's not something surprising, that's just basic common sense. The issues become then who defines sort of normal development, who defines what's the right sort of social environment, who defines what's the right society to be brought up in, all these sort of things. So that's where the issues come into play. And then we talked about there was an over-focus on social factors, that you could fix everything. If you just fixed the environment, everything would be sorted. So that's where, and it led to too much focus on superficial equality, especially around economic issues. And then you see the results of these errors. If you don't define these things properly, or you've got people that have nefarious agendas, or they don't understand human beings, these results sort of creep in, which is like communism, uncontrolled capitalism, like libertarianism, that sort of stuff starts creeping into society, globalism. Then it leads to, when you're trying to develop like the perfect children, oftentimes it leads to the mass drugging of children. And if there's people that speak out against the systems, these social theories and things like that, oftentimes they're persecuted for being dissidents. So talk about the solutions from last week, to talk about just acknowledging innate talents, that there is, people just have innate talents, and that sometimes biologically we have certain gifts or talents, so people will go in different, you can't force people into a certain mold or a certain box. And just check who's behind certain theories or certain agendas, what agenda they're pushing, like that's really important when it comes to these social theories. And then talk about switch off from the media that promotes errors. Otherwise, as I said, you'll be asking your father which pronoun he prefers to be called. So that's the sort of inevitable logic. For people who weren't here last week, that does make sense. But, and then just remember that man has a body and a soul. So that was just a basic overview of last week. So just a bit about cognitive psychology. So there's a definition from the modern definition of cognitive psychology. So cognitive psychology is the scientific study of the mind as an information processor. Cognitive psychologists try to build up cognitive models of the information processing that goes on inside people's minds, including perception, attention, language, memory, thinking, and consciousness. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's just looking at how people come to perceive the world, what they pay attention to, how they develop their language, how their memory, how how the memory develops, and also try to explain a bit about consciousness. There is an issue here with, like, the analogy of an information processor is absolutely fine to say, like, you know, our minds are something like an information processor, but they're only something like an information processor. Some people can take that analogy to an extreme level where they think mind is just an information processor. So it's just being careful with that explanation. But apart from that, that's basically what cognitive psychology covers. So you got definition of personality psychology. So personality psychology is a branch of psychology that studies personality and its variations among individuals. It is a scientific study which aims to show how people are individually different due to psychological forces. It's just looking at character development, looking at different sort of traits, different dispositions, and looking at the sort of variations amongst individuals, and also what we share as well as humans. That's what sort of personality psychology is looking at. I've got there's a kind of picture there, just of an eye, just a person with, it's an older person with a few lines and things like that. You can see that they've got a bit of character, like you can see that they've lived a bit of a life. So, and I'll talk about that, about character and the sort of how there isn't maybe as many characters today as there was years ago, and I'll explain why I'm saying that later. So what cognitive psychology gets right? There's nothing sort of very special or very new in what I'm saying here. So what we think about affects how we feel and behave. So that's basically, and we know that ourselves when we say, like, you know, you need to take your mind off things, or you need to focus on something else. So if you're thinking about it, if you're constantly focused, say, on the negative things happening in the world, or you've been hit with all the negative news happening in the world, that just gets at you sometimes. It really just hits you, like. So it's basically, that's what cognitive psychologists get right. So we take our mind off things, or even just watching. Sometimes just watching, if you're just constantly reading or sort of trying to figure things out, sometimes just watching a football match or rugby or whatever it might be, just to take your mind off things, is really useful. Also, how we use our attention, and memory is really important. So it's really important, like what you deliberately remember and what you deliberately decide to store in your mind is really important. And so that's, if you try to, what you learn from a young age as well, what you are given, even if you're given some songs to remember, some poems to remember, all this stuff is really useful and important. So these sort of things are really useful and important. There's patterns there that help or hinder learning and memory. So there are certain things that if you learn certain things in certain environments, say it's a really quiet environment, it's easier to recall those things in a quiet environment. While if you learn things in a really sort of fast-paced environment, you're more likely to recall them in a really fast-paced and noisy environment. It kind of works like that. If you ever see, when it comes to, say, the sports stars or things like that, when you're trying to learn sort of how to deal with pressure, they might play a game situation. Some of their training will be very relaxed, like they'll be just sort of, you know, just preparing just in a sort of relaxed way. But they'll always prepare is for the game situation as well. So when they're under pressure, they'll be able to remember things more clearly. So they've already learned that. So that's how you can learn things, and your body can learn things that way as well, knows how to react like. Right. And our emotions affect and are affected by what we think, remember, or pay attention to. So if we're in a really, if we're feeling very sort of, if we're very agitated or we're feeling very annoyed with things, that can obviously affect the way we think and how we remember things and what we pay attention to. So all these things are just basic. There's nothing too complex in any of this stuff, but it's the stuff they get right. This is an area that's really important as well. If there's an error in information or in processing of information, it can affect our psychological health and lead us to behave in ways we would not otherwise. So that's just talking about, that's how important error is. So if people, I don't think people realize how much, if we get something wrong or something false that enters into our mind, how much that sends us astray. It's really toxic. So if we don't get the right information or we're not able to process it correctly, then it leads to all sorts of difficulties and problems with our psychological health. So the cognitive psychology, basically the hypothesis is, if one can gain accurate information, process it correctly, and control one's emotions, one can be psychologically healthy. That's absolutely fine. That makes perfect sense. And you can see there that there's a few things. I said what we pay attention to, what we deliberately remember and store in our memory, and certain environments can either help or hinder our learning. Okay, so if you get these sort of things right, you can sort of help your psychological health. Okay.
Give an example. We say just making an error. Who's making the error?
I'll come back to that. That's something I'll get into that at the end. A bit about personality psychology and what they get right. So personality traits, dispositions are consistent across lifespan. That's pretty, even when a child is born, you can see that they've got a certain character, they've got a certain disposition, they've got a certain personality, unique personality to themselves. And that's consistent across the lifespan. So if you ever talk to somebody and you've met somebody, maybe you knew somebody when they were like, a teenager, and then you meet them 20 years down the line, there's usually, you can tell that they still have that similar sort of character, similar personality that they've always had. And you'd be surprised if they didn't, if they'd gone from somebody that was really outgoing and social, somebody that was just completely antisocial. You become saying, well, what's happened? How come you've changed? So it's consistent across the lifespan. And if you'd ask somebody if they were acting out of character, you'd ask them, I was like, oh, you're not yourself. That's pretty basic sort of stuff. It's influenced by personality types, or mostly influenced by biology. There's a genetic, it's passed on through the genes. So you'll have a nephew that's kind of maybe like your uncle, or has sort of characteristics like that sort of way. And that's passed on through the genes. It can be affected by environment. If you find yourself in a really volatile environment, there's for example, soldiers, if they're in war-torn environments for so long, their personality can change over time. But it does take a lot of strong environmental factors to change your personality, because generally it's consistent across the lifespan. This is where modern psychology agrees with this, compared to the older classical psychology, you could say. There are a limited number of personality traits. The modern psychology theories say there's about 5 or 6 personality traits. The older theories say there's about 4 personality traits. I'll talk about why the older theories are closer to the truth rather than the more modern theories. But they generally agree on that. There's a limited number, about 5 or 6 personality traits, and I'll talk a bit more about them. And one can identify personality types through analysis. Today, that's more focused on looking at things like dictionaries, looking for the different adjectives that describe personality types. That's the way modern psychology usually works today. Or it's done through tests, so surveys or things like that. That's how they're finding out about personality types. Years ago, like back 2,000 years ago and up to about the Middle Ages, there was more focus on philosophy for understanding personality types, and there was more focus on getting to know individuals. It was more talking about two individuals for an extended period, rather than sort of multiple tests of people or surveys, that sort of thing. But you can, through analysis, you're able to identify these things. So the hypothesis is, if one can know one's personality, one can try to work on aspects of it, the aspects one can change or manage. Look, we're just some things about ourselves, that's who we are, and we just have to sort of deal with it, and our family, unfortunately, sometimes, and friends have to just deal with it sometimes as well, and that's just who we are. But sometimes we can change certain aspects of our personality as well, just certain, or at least you can direct it in the right way. I'll talk a bit more about that as well. So here is where we get into sort of the sort of problematic areas. And this is in relation to cognitive psychology. So you've got, who decides what is good or normal, or bad and abnormal thinking? Like, you rely on the likes of cognitive psychologists. There's a modern cognitive psychologist called Albert Ellis. Albert Ellis is one of the most famous cognitive psychologists. He's the person who's behind cognitive therapy. There's another guy that does cognitive behavioral therapy, but he does cognitive therapy. It's very popular within the psychological, psychotherapeutic field as well. But Albert Ellis believes he was part of the. He just believed there was no restrictions on any sexual activity. He just believed it shouldn't be anything at all really in relation to that. And also he was an atheist, so he didn't understand what we were here for, what we were created for. But he's one of the main forces behind a lot of modern sort of cognitive psychology stuff, particularly cognitive therapy, which is used by a lot of therapists. And also it comes into who defines what is true or good and what is false or bad, and therefore okay for the person to process or have access to. Now, the truth is really important. So there's a lot of people who say people should just be given the truth, but who defines who gets to say what is true or not, and what people get exposed to? Is that your educators, your government officials? There was a picture, I put it up online as part of the talk last week when I put the talk online, and there was a picture of there was four ministers, but there was Leo Varadkar, Catherine Zapponi, and Simon Harris, and they were all in a care centre, and they were with a young child, and it kind of made me cringe because I was thinking they're the very people that are going to be dictating to particularly that child that was there what they should be, the information they should be given. So it's kind of just makes you sort of cringe when you see that sort of thing, and all smiles, and it's all smiles and all great, but it's very very dangerous, some of the stuff particularly those three people are pushing. So that's what I'm talking about. Who gets to decide what our children should get exposed to and what they shouldn't get exposed to, particularly children. It's also important to talk about the adults, but children particularly. Should it be the parents or should it be TUSLA? And I remember reading an article a couple of weeks ago about TUSLA sending a couple to prison because they wanted to homeschool them, and they so that's the sort of stuff, the pressure that's been put on parents today. Also, then you've got at a global level, you've got who gets to censor the information that's coming in. When you talk about that's what's really important when it comes to our psychological health, is the information that we're exposed to and the information that can really affect our psychological health if it's false or harmful. So you've got Facebook or talking about censorship, YouTube or talking about censorship, but who are the people behind this that are trying to dictating what is true and what is false, fake news and all that sort of stuff. You also got the ADL, which is Anti-Defamation League. It's a big organization in the US that's censoring a lot of conservative speakers. Now, there's a reaction to that, and this is the wrong. I really believe this is the wrong reaction. There's a lot of people who shout, well, all this censorship generally happens more so from, you could say, people on the left side of the political spectrum than on the right side. But what the right side of the political spectrum often does then is shout about free speech. We have to have free speech. That's not going to solve things, because if you just have free speech, it morphs into a sort of a libertarian sort of anything goes sort of model. So you have to be very careful with that. And I mentioned the Burkean there. It's a paper. It's a paper up in Dublin, and it kind of promotes the idea of free speech. The Burkean, Edmund Burke, as far as I'm aware, was a Mason. There's a lot of information that suggests he was a Freemason. So pushing that idea of free speech, you have to kind of wonder what's that going to result in as well. So you've also got people like Ben Shapiro as well, who's pushing the idea of free speech. He's another big player in YouTube. And the RAND Corporation is another organization that's connected to a group called the Tavistock Institute. I'll mention them again. But they're pushing the idea of libertarianism, and also they'd be anti-Christian as well. So also I mentioned the Free Speech Coalition as well. That's a trade union for people in the adult industry. Again, they're pushing for this free speech. That's not the reaction. That's not what you want to push back against the censorship. You have to understand that you can't have just free speech. There has to be, everybody can read it. You need some level of censorship, but who gets to decide what is and isn't censored? Is that the parents? Is that TUSLA? Who is it like? And what are the principles behind it as well? So when it comes to personality psychology, again, it's the same thing. Who decides what is good and normal or bad and abnormal personality? And how much of our personality can we change and what should we change? There's a lot of debate in the modern psychology field about what you can change and what can't be changed in terms of personality. And one of the things they also try to find who defines what is and is not a personality type. Like there's a model called the Hexaco model. It was developed in Canada, and it's very popular in the likes of the Netherlands, and it's getting more popular across Europe and the world. But that puts humility, honesty, as a personality trait, not as a virtue, but as a personality trait. So it kind of says, well, it kind of decides. It's almost like it's inevitable that somebody's going to be dishonest or not going to be humble, rather than sort of aiming towards being humble and honest. There's too much focus on sort of that it's biologically driven and that there's no such thing as virtue. That could be a real problem. So this is where we get into issues, because we get who defines what's a personality disorder and who decides. You see this in psychiatry or in the psychological field. If somebody's been quite difficult, they can often get a diagnosis of borderline personality type, which is often given to people that just are a bit of a handful. And a lot of these, as I talked about in previous talks, psychiatrists, psychologists, sociologists have a certain agenda that they're pushing as well, in terms of they're pushing very Marxist agenda and just trying to control people by using the tools of psychiatry. So, and also, should we let the Psychological Society of Ireland decide what's a good personality and a bad personality? That's another group as well that's pushed for abortion last year, and also telling psychologists they must affirm homosexual behaviour. So you have to be careful with these sort of groups of who's pushing this up. The Tavistock Institute is a global kind of psychological network that's pushing some really toxic theories. It's set up. It was set up in London about in the 1920s, and it was Freudian based. So it always had an anti-Christian element to it, and it's a very powerful institution. So they're working very hard at pushing their sort of hypothesis as well. So that's the issues that are happening. Now, the result of these errors, I'll just get a drink. Once you've got people that are defining sort of human beings in the wrong way, that they don't really understand. They don't really understand human beings. They don't understand the mind, and they don't understand what we're here for. This is the sort of things that can happen. Particularly with I mentioned Albert Ellis. He's a cognitive psychologist I spoke about. He talks about how, like, if you have guilt or anxiety or any sort of what he considers negative emotions, they're all seen as bad. They're not seen as something that might be indicating something. They're almost seen as something I just need to get rid of. I just need to get rid of this straight away. So emotions are sort of not seen as useful in any shape or form. They're just seen as something that's a nuisance, rather than something that they might be indicating something. And then we tend to see people as, this can happen in modern cognitive psychology theories as well. There's a very mechanistic view of people, in terms of people are seen as they are just seen as an information processor, and not seen as a human being with a body and soul, but just as something that you can just press a few buttons, and if you get the right sort of code, like you do with computer programs, you get the right answer. And it doesn't work like that. And then when you start treating people like that, you end up treating them terribly. This is popular as well today, particularly when people don't understand the link between emotions and the intellect. That people run towards emotional freedom therapy, or they run towards they try to numb their emotions. So you see that within the psychological field, the psychiatric field, the medical field. A lot of these drugs that people are on, they don't actually fix anything. They just kind of numb people. They just kind of shut people down a lot, and people are trying to run away from their emotions. So I just got something to say on that. I'll come back. That's what I was just going to talk about, that imposter. This is something I've come across recently. It's not I've never come across it when I was studying psychology, but it's more recent phenomenon, the imposter syndrome. So there's this idea, if you're somebody that's very successful, materially successful, and everything looks all right, like you've got your wife, and you've got your couple of kids, and you've got a nice house, and you're living in the suburbs, and you've got a decent job. That there's this thing called but sometimes you might be thinking, there's something not quite right in my life. There's something not quite right. Maybe you're maybe you're atheist, and you're sort of you're living not a very good moral life, but things are all right on the surface, that sort of way. And oftentimes that can be like a niggling conscience. Something's at you, and nowadays we're trying to explain that away through calling it imposter syndrome. So you feel like you're an imposter, having all the good stuff around you, but that's a disorder, really. You shouldn't be thinking like that. But if you could just explore that a bit more, that niggling conscience, you might get somewhere. You might actually figure out, no, I'm not. This looks all good, but it's not actually that good. And then if you with all this stuff, if this is thrown at you all the time, then you'd be like, all right, just each their own. I give up. I give up. Park. I'll have more. At the end. I'll some questions. Sorry. So you can just kind of give up and say, well, look, I don't want to figure this stuff out anymore, so I'm just going to say each to their own. So this is on the personality psychology side of things. So personality expression is seen as positive or negative depending on the prejudice of the observer. Now, I'd be someone that kind of has a melancholic maybe personality type. All right, even with the bad jokes, I still have they're pretty good for me more than anybody else. All right, but I sometimes find if because of my personality type that people that are really sanguine. Sanguine is somebody that's really bubbly, really full of energy all the time, really positive all the time. That can kind of just can get to me sometimes because I'd be more serious. I'd be just more like just analytical and things like that. Now I have to be aware of that, but that kind of gets me. It's the same thing happens with people that are really sanguine, that are really happy. Somebody that's kind of more serious too. Sometimes just tells them just calm down a bit. I can kind of get to them as well. So depending on your personality type, you can kind of get on each other's wick, and you just have to figure that out. I suppose anybody that has a husband or wife kind of understands that sort of, and they have people that are different personality types. They kind of get that. They figure each other out as they go along. So with the modern personality theory, there's no universal model amongst modern psychologists. There is amongst older theories. One of the older theories about the 4 temperaments. That's been shared universally for thousands of years. People have said that's a great model and it works. But the more modern stuff, there's competing models. There's no consensus around it. And some of the research is really poor. I worked on a what's called a psychological department for about a year in New Zealand, and I was studying personality. So I was talking to professors, and I was talking to sort of researchers on personality. And there was there was a Chinese model of personality, and there was a Dutch model of personality, there was an American model of personality. And I remember my supervisor he went to a conference over in China, and they were developing a personality model. And he thought it was a load of pants. Like, he just thought it was, there was no good grounding in it. Even the empirical evidence behind it was really poor. And he felt they were just pushing it because it was just the next best thing, So, and it would have got a lot of publications for this particular professor as well. So that's the kind of stuff that's happening in academia. A lot of the academic work is not that good at the moment. It's really poor, and it's not grounded in good science. As I mentioned earlier about the humility and honesty, that is, it's kind of explained away This is a lot of what psychology does. It explains away morality, and now it's kind of explaining humility and honesty is and we're saying, as I said, it's calling it a personality trait rather than something to aim towards. It's saying it's something that somebody has, and that's just how they're born. So that's really dangerous. As well as in the modern stuff, there's barely any acknowledgement of the four temperaments. That's your kind of classical stuff, which I'll mention. I'll mention it in a couple of slides. And also, they explain away a lot of this stuff. Explains away the will and free will, and as the highest faculty of man's soul. It's just ignored or explained away, rather than saying like, people have a choice. People have a choice of how to respond to certain things, rather than saying just that's just how they are. That's just their personality. So here we are now. We're on to that's now we've got you to that stage again where it's all like that's how bad it is. So here's what to do about it. So understand, that's the first thing. When it comes to cognitive psychologists, the popular ones that are out there, they oftentimes explain away. They don't have much time for emotions. Now, emotions aren't. We get things wrong sometimes because of our emotions. We get carried away with our emotions sometimes, but emotions are necessary. It's how we're created. It's how we're designed. They're sometimes a necessary indicator of something going wrong, and we can't really operate. We can't operate in the world without our emotions. We need them. The best analogy. I was looking for a picture of it, but it was from a talk that I looked at recently. The best analogy is the emotions are like horses. Say you're the person in the carriage, okay? That's like your soul, and you've got the horses that are sort of you're trying to guide. It's like your emotions, and you're trying to direct them. Now, if the horses aren't there at all, if you've numbed them completely, there's no horses, you're not moving at all. Or if you lose the rein of reason, if you lose the rein and you're not using reason anymore, then the horses will just guide you wherever they want you to go. So emotions, you have to be careful with them, but you do need them because you need them to guide you. You need them to be able to have some drive in the world and be able to get somewhere. So they are necessary. This is what to also just avoid error. It's so important to avoid error, and only store information in your memory which is true and good. It's that important. I'll talk a bit about that when it comes to understanding how the intellect affects the will. So we have like, but I don't want to make this I won't get into sort of scholastic philosophy right now. It's very too complicated. But this is just a basic understanding of how the intellect affects the will. So emotions, and especially passions, are the source of the greatest good and not the greatest evil. That's what a professor of philosophy, Charles A. Dupree, said. So our will is affected by affected by our intellect. So what our intellect takes in, what it sees as good, drives us forward. So we're always chasing the good. If we see something as good, it will drive us forward, as this definition says here. So whatever appeals to man as perfect bliss, as something completely good and supremely satisfying, necessarily draws his will. There will be no good at all in refusing it, and there is every possible reason for accepting it. So when perfect goodness, therefore, or perfect happiness comes in sight, the will cannot help going forward to it with love and longing. So it's something that's really good, something perfect, something true. We're drawn towards it. That's what we want. Now, advertisers are some of the best at doing this. Like you've got Coca-Cola, who are probably the most skilled at sort of getting people to buy their product. And an awful lot of times they talk about like, I know it says here, relieves fatigue, the most refreshing drink in the world. I'm not sure about that, but one thing to talk about, particularly about open happiness. People might have seen that Coca-Cola, one of its taglines is open happiness. It's trying to sell you something really good, something that you really want, so you're drawn towards it. That's how our mind works, and that's how our will works. So if your mind thinks something is really good, your will is immediately drawn towards it. So that's how our mind works. Now, there's something. I put up the rainbow flag there because rainbows are beautiful. Like they're like, if anybody looks at a rainbow, you can say that's an incredible sight, a rainbow. But what I come back to Professor Charles A. Dupree. He was a professor of philosophy. He was a professor in Harvard at the start of the 20th century. Excellent mind. And he says, it is not allowable to present as beautiful and worthy of admiration that which is in opposition to the rules of morality. So we're drawn to what's good, like, and beauty helps us as well. Sometimes beauty helps us to draw us to what's good. You see that in the most magnificent cathedrals and things like that. They're absolutely incredible. So you're drawn towards them. You're drawn towards the beauty of it. And what's distorted here is the rainbow. One of the most beautiful things you can imagine has been used for nefarious purposes. So anytime you see a rainbow now, people immediately think something else rather than that's beautiful. So it's really clever. It's really cynical as well to do that, because it's one of those things that does give us joy. The rainbow does definitely give us joy, but it's been used for nefarious purposes. So I think people know. I've been meaning that about the LGBT stuff. If people weren't aware of that. So yeah, what to do about it? Don't get overwhelmed with the complexity and power of the brain. Like, the brain is an incredible organ in many ways. It's a very, very complex organ as well, and we're still figuring it out. But at the end of the day, it's just an organ. You know, it's not something to get so sort of obsessed about. You see people waxing like eulogies about the brain, and you see some professors, like, you know, on programs sort of speaking such, holding a brain in their hands and saying this is the most amazing thing ever, like, you know. And there's something that is important to study, but at the end of the day, it's just an organ. What you focus on and pay attention to is vitally important. Now, I've got a picture of St. Francis of Assisi there. Instead of looking at a brain, he's looking at a skull. I know. He's contemplating what's far more important than looking at just a piece of material stuff. He's looking at a skull to represent what happens after this. What happens when I become this? So it's really important what you pay attention to. I've got a quote here from Fulton Sheen. He talks about, it's from Peace of Soul. If anybody's ever read that book, it's a great book. He talks about the pagan tries to ignore death, but each tick of the clock brings him nearer to it through fear and anxiety. The Christian begins his life by contemplating his death, knowing that he will die. He plans his life accordingly in order to enjoy eternal life. The Christian principle for conquering death is twofold. Think about death, rehearse for it by mortification now. So that's what you got your example there of St. Francis of Assisi. And there's many other saints as well that have been depicted with a skull in their hand as well. So, a little bit about personality psychology and what to do. The study of the four temperaments. If people aren't familiar with the four temperaments, I would say definitely check them out. You'll find lots of information online, and I'll give a couple of resources, a couple of references at the end. I'd say avoid the modern psychological research is really poor. From having worked in the field worked for about a year and was really digging into sort of modern psychology research. It's really poor. You can't trust a lot of the information that's coming out. It's just academia. It's the psychological field is particularly bad at the moment. So I'll give an example with that. I mentioned that Chinese professor earlier, and I remember he came to the university to give a sort of lecture, and he gave a talk about his new research that he found about sort of personality types, and he showed a picture of Tiananmen Square, you know, the tank man in Tiananmen Square, and he talked about how fortunate it was that they suppressed that revolution. You know, it was like, you know, how fortunate it was they rolled over, they killed so many people during the early 90s. It was like, this is the sort of people that are guiding personality research in academia. And also, I remember him boasting about, and actually my lecturer had come from an ex-communist country, so he was kind of like, this is bad, like, you know. And the professor also was boasting about like how much money he was going to make from his personality research. So he had an affinity for communism, but he also was a kind of capitalist at the same time. That's the sort of stuff that's happening. It's not good. That's why people might think, I don't want to be anti-intellectual here. I mean, there's a need for universities and there's a need for people studying important things, but it's just the state of academia at the moment. It's terrible. Also, know thyself. As I mentioned earlier, I know some things about myself. So if I meet somebody that's really, if I meet somebody that's really bubbly, I just have to hold back a bit. I could be like, okay, don't get too serious. And I know myself, I can be overly serious at times. So you kind of have to know your disposition, and it's really useful. And develop the positive aspects of your personality trait. Like all of us are going to have certain personality characteristics, and there's some aspects of it going to be really positive because, for myself, I'd say just I'm pretty analytical. That's useful to certain degrees. It can be too analytical where you can't make a decision and you're stuck in the aisle looking at all the different cheeses for half an hour. So you kind of got to know yourself. And just remember that the man has a body and a soul. And as at the end here, all God's creatures have a place in the choir. I've said that a few times, but it's so important for personality. And I talk about what does St. Thomas Aquinas advise. This is in relation to personality now. St. Thomas, of course, one of the greatest doctor in the church, with the greatest mind. The church that has been in the church. He's an incredible writer, incredible philosopher. So he just talks about, this is talking about what St. Thomas says about personality and different characters. So he says the recognition of the divine constitution of the diversity is so important, according to St. Thomas, that it is difficult to overstate it. For the degree to which diversities of perfections, functions, capacities, talents, and abilities are suppressed, the foundation of the city of man is undermined. To suppress the variety and differences that are one with nature and individuals intentionally not only bespeaks some fundamental moral disorder, but is counterproductive as well. True unity, rather, must be principally achieved in the moral domain by fostering an accord of human customs and laws with natural law. Otherwise, human society cannot long endure and flourish. You need a solid moral base if people want to express themselves and be the different characters. And I don't know about you, but there doesn't seem to be the same characters today as there used to be. And maybe I'm talking about my mother and father might say this, they've been in Longford for years. Like Tony's one of the characters that's remaining, all right. But they say there's lots of they remember years ago just characters, and it's a lot of people just flattened today. A lot of kids are they're anxious and they just don't really want to. They're scared to express themselves because they don't have that foundation that a lot of the older generation had. And I'll just finish with a quote from Fulton Sheen on that. And I think this is really just kind of sums up the personality side of things. So I'll finish with this. So life may be likened to children playing. The playground established by the church might be a rock in the sea, surrounded by great walls. Inside of those walls, the children may dance and sing and play as they please. Liberals would ask the church to tear down the walls on the grounds that they are a restraining influence. But if this were done, you would find all the children huddled in the center of the island, afraid to play, afraid to sing, afraid to dance, afraid of falling into the sea. And I think that kind of sums up a lot of what we're seeing today. So that's it. That's just for it's 2 weeks' time. The next talk's in 2 weeks' time, by the way. Not next week. I had to change it because bank holiday next week. So in case you had it down for next week, it's 2 weeks. And I'll just look over what we've discussed so far and look at further develop the solutions to these errors. And that's just some reading as well. There's just having a good grounding in philosophy is really useful, so you have a firm base. If you're not someone who just kind of wants to delve into philosophy, Bishop Fulton Sheen's really good. His talks on YouTube, his initial talks had talks in the 50s and the 60s. Excellent talks, sort of basic understanding of human beings, about psychoanalysis as well, about character. So there's a couple of books there, if people, and I can send out the slides to anybody if they want them as well. Also, I wrote a couple of blog pieces, they might be useful for people as well.